We're gonna go ahead and get started in a little bit. I see some people are watching already. Let's see. Okay, so hello and welcome to Photoshop Basics. My name is Victoria, and I'm an instructor for the Digital Media Lab here at Main Street Library, which is a part of Newport News Public Library system. Before we get started, I want to remind you that if you have any questions, you can use the YouTube live chat, which is located on the right side of your window if you're using a browser. And if you're using a phone or maybe a tablet, it will probably be located beneath the video. I will try to respond as quickly as I can to all your comments and questions. Bear in mind there might be a little bit of a delay because of the latency. Ask that you please be respectful when you're making your comments and your questions, and any inappropriate comments will be removed by our moderator. Okay, so to follow along with the different exercises, you'll want to make sure that you've already downloaded Adobe Photoshop using the link in the description box below. It will give you a 7-day free trial Keep in mind that if you've run out of your trial and you're still interested in messing around with Photoshop a little bit more, you want to learn some more, you are able to use it here at the Digital Media Lab here in the library during open lab hours. We have the full Adobe suite here. All right, and so lastly, if you'd like to practice doing with the files that I'm using in this lesson, you can download the files in the description box below via the Dropbox link. I think it's about 4 files in there. So if you haven't already, go ahead and download those so you'll be able to follow along. All right. So let's see. We'll go ahead and get started then. But before then, while I sort of get set up still, go ahead and drop any questions, or if you have anything specific about Photoshop that you'd like to learn, type that out in the comment box below. If you have anything specific that you'd like to learn, like whether you want to learn about cropping or color correction, things like that, go ahead and type those out. What would you like to learn about Photoshop specifically? All right, we got a couple people here already. Hello to you both. Hello, Cosmic Black Girl and Sarita Kadka. All right, I'm gonna share my Photoshop window. Okay. All right, so basically today we're going to be talking about a little bit about the navigating the Photoshop interface. We'll talk about the different navigation tools and other basic tools you can use to get started in Photoshop. And as we sort of like incorporate more tools down the line, we'll start to explain the concept of non-destructive editing in Photoshop and what does it mean to non-destructively edit it. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is open one of my files. So when you want to open a file, you can use either File in the menu bar at the top here and go to Open, or if you're on the landing page, which we are right here, you can open the file by clicking this Open button here on the left side of the window here. And I'm going to switch my screen so you'll actually see my File Explorer. So I'm going to click on Open, and I'm going to locate the folder that I've downloaded prior to the class. So when you download the folder from the Dropbox link, it's going to show up as a zip file. So you want to make sure you have some software that's going to be able to unzip it, or you might want to have one that's already sort of included within your software, whether you're using Windows or Mac. So you just want to unzip the file first, and then you'll be able to click into it. And the first file that we're actually going to open up is the underexposed image. So I'm just going to double click that to open it. All right, and so the first thing we're going to do, we're not going to actually edit this quite yet. We're going to go over the interface here, or what this is called at this point when you've gone beyond the landing page. It is the workspace area. So we're going to sort of move from left to right here, sort of reading style. So we'll start up here. So as I mentioned before, this up here is the menu bar. Well, I mentioned that the file is up here, the file menu. These are where you'll sort of find all your main menu options. The main ones you're going to need to worry about today are just the file. So if you decide that you prefer to open up your files in this window, you can choose to do that. You can also create a new file from this file menu here. And you'll notice you can actually close your Photoshop window here. You can open recent files, and you can also, this is where you'll also be like exporting your images when it is time to like export and save and all that stuff like that. So that's like your sort of main functions for the file menu. We'll sort of be using some of the commands in here. If you decide not to use hotkeys or shortcut keys, you might know them as, but the main ones you're going to want from this one are undo and redo. How to undo and redo an action. So if you make a mistake at any point in the lesson and you want to go back, you can either go to edit in your file menu and you can click on undo, or you can use the shortcut key, which will be Control Z for PC, or you can do Command Z for Mac. If you are using or viewing this tutorial on a Mac, then it is going to be Command Z. So the next important sort of menu that we'll be talking about today and going back and forth between use is the image menu. And so from this particular menu, we're going to be using a lot of the adjustments. So these are like sort of the adjustments that you'd use for color correction, just to manipulate photos, whether it's color, brightness, darkness, all that stuff is sort of here in this adjustment submenu here. And all of that lies underneath image. All right, so right beneath the main menu is the options bar. And one thing important to note about the options bar is it sort of goes in tow with the toolbar here. You use it in company with the toolbar here. So anytime you activate a tool, the options bar will change and give you a list of different options that are relative to that tool that you have activated. So if I go down this list of different tools and just randomly click on them, you'll notice that each one has a different set of options for that specific tool. And so that'll be important to note when you see these options up here changing and you want to customize that specific tool, then you will need to make those adjustments in this specific bar up here. All right, and so right beneath that options bar, I'm going to go back to my move tool here. Right beneath that options bar, you're going to find the document tab. So this is our document name here. And this is telling us like how much it's zoomed in right now and what color profile it is. A color profile is basically means, RGB specifically means that you're working in red, green, and blue. And when you're working with art or photos that you'll be viewing on the computer, you typically will choose a RGB color profile. But so these are giving you those specific details in the document tab. And this X, if you ever need to exit out of a document tab or close it for whatever reason, you just click this X right here. So I'll go ahead and do that. And you'll notice, because I've opened this up recently, I can actually just go to my recent files here and open that right back up. Okay. All right. And so we're just going to move to the left a little bit. And the icon that I want to focus on way to the right side of the window here is actually going to be your workspace icon. So if I click this will give me a list of different ways to customize my workspace based on the projects that I'm working on. So right now we are on Essentials, and Essentials is basically made up of different panels that Adobe deems necessary for you to get started, just to help you get started out in Photoshop. In my personal opinion, a lot of these are not necessary. And so with that being said, you can actually customize your workspace based on your needs. So there's a couple of options you have here to do that. So honestly, a lot of these, we'll start in this section right here. We don't need them. So if I were to customize my own workspace, I would get rid of the panels by right-clicking on a tab. And I have two options here. I can close the tab group, which I know I don't want any of these tabs here. So I'm fine with closing that tab group. That means it's going to close all of these tabs that are within the same group. So if I go to close tab group, you'll notice it's blocked off here. It'll get rid of all of those. Okay. All right. So the other thing you'll notice is that there's two arrows next to some of these panel groups. So what that basically means is you can expand, and you'll see as I hover over top of it, you can actually expand or collapse these panels. So if I click on this, these two arrows here, it'll pop out another set of panels. And so I can actually, if I decide that I want them to be popped out, but maybe don't want them to take up that much space, I can hover over the edge of these different panels and squeeze them in. Or I guess I squeezed in enough, but I can stretch them out or squeeze them in. And if I decide they still don't need to take up that much space, I can collapse them and keep them in icon view. And when they're in icon view, I can just click them and they'll sort of pop up as a temporary window for the panel. And when I click out of it, when I click those arrows, it'll collapse back again. Okay. Now you can actually move your panels around as well. So I can shift the panels between each other. If I decide one should take precedence over the other, I can shift them around. I can pop them out and then put them back in place as well. You want to make sure when you're popping them back into place or pulling them out or whatever, lining them up, adjusting them however you want to, you see this blue window before you actually release the mouse on, release the click on your mouse. So I'm clicking, I'm dragging it around, I'm holding it, and then when I want to release and place it into a spot, I'm going to release and it'll pop back in there. Okay. So I'm going to get rid of some more of these panels. And that should be close to what I want it to be like, because these are like sort of the main ones that you'll want. So getting started, if you are customizing your workspace right now, can you get Photoshop on iPad? All right, so someone has asked, can you get Photoshop on iPad? You can get Photoshop on iPad actually. The only thing is it's quite a little bit more limited in the features. You're only going to get the full amount of features when you have the Photoshop app on your desktop. iPad is great for like when you want to do drawing or like simple edits, or honestly for simple edits, you probably want to use like a program like Lightroom to, for photos, but you can also use Photoshop for your iPad or any tablet really that can download the Photoshop software from an app store. I see some more people join. Hello, hello, hello. All right, where was I? All right, so I actually have a workspace saved for this particular stream. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And I'm going to shift my camera over. Okay. All right, so the last thing that we'll go over for this workspace area is the toolbar. So these are the tools that you're going to be using, some of the tools that you'll be using today. We're sort of going to be focusing on the selection tools. So these first three are different types of selection tools. Your move tool. We're going to be focusing on navigation tools, so like how to zoom and pan the button, pan the photo, and crop tool and brush and all those standard stuff. So if you want to move your photo, for example, if you're opening a document for the first time and you want to move it, it might start off being locked. And so what I mean by that is, like, if you take a look at your layers panel, which remember is going to be to the, if you've set it up, if you haven't like messed with it at all, it should be over to the right side of your Photoshop window. And so in that layers panel, you'll see something that either says background or layer 1. And right next to it, you'll see a little lock. So if you don't see this lock, you're fine. You don't have to do anything. But if you do see this lock, just click on it and it'll unlock the layer, which will allow us to move the photo around. So in order to move the photo around, we're going to take this first tool here. This is going to be your most commonly used tool. And so for that reason, you can just select the tool by clicking on it whenever you need it, but also you can press V if you ever want to activate this tool. So say I have another tool selected and I want to quickly just move back and forth between move and another tool. I can press the shortcut key V and that will switch back over to the move tool. So the move tool, like I said, just moves around your photo. You can move it anywhere on your canvas. Okay, so if you need to move anything for any reason, you can use the move tool. And then we're going to use the zoom tool just to get you comfortable with using the zoom and the pan tool. We're going to use these two tools at the bottom here of your toolbar. So with the zoom tool, you just click it to activate it. You can also press Z on your keyboard if you want to press Z to activate it. And you'll notice when you're hovering over these icons that it'll give you a little animation window that tells you what the tool is called. It'll give you the shortcut key for it if there is an assigned shortcut key to that specific tool, and it'll give you an explanation of what that tool does. So this is the zoom tool, and it's giving you an explanation of all the different things that it does. Okay. Oops, looks like my window is a little bit. Hold on a second. Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties here. All right, and we're back. Looks like let me see. Hang in there. It looks like you guys can tell me on your end whether or not Photoshop looks a little bit corrupt or like the windows aren't showing up properly. Let me know in the comment section. On my end, it looks like it's distorted a little bit. Okay, let's try going with this. No. Okay, sorry guys, I'm having some technical difficulties. I will fix them and I'll be right back. In the meantime, if you have any questions specific to Photoshop, go ahead and ask them in the comment box below or next to the video. I think the solution has been made here. I think it's because I'm live streaming. It's taking a lot of GPU power away. So I had to deactivate that in my settings. You should be able to see the photo now. Unfortunately, that means it is not able to do scrubby zoom. So if you are though able to see scrubby zoom on your computer or whatever device you're looking at to use Photoshop, with scrubby zoom activated, you should just be able to click and drag to the right or left to zoom in or out. With with your GPU processor deactivated, which you'll see I adjusted those settings in my preferences when I went to general, and then performance, and then underneath use graphics processor, I deactivated that, and it allowed me to bring this photo back up here, and so you guys can actually see it. So let me see. So you can, with the regular zoom, you can click and draw a little square here, and that'll zoom in a little bit by bit based on how much you choose to want to zoom in. If you want to zoom out without the scrubby zoom activated, you can just come up to your options bar. So remember when we said, based on the tool that you have activated, your options will change. So right now it's selected on plus. So anytime that we click and draw a square, it'll zoom in. If you want to zoom back out, again, without scrubby zoom being activated, we can just click and it'll drag out. If you ever want to, say you dragged out too far, or if you dragged in too close, you can always fit the photo or whatever you're working on to the window or have it be 100% by clicking on these options up in the options bar. So if I click on 100%, it's going to zoom into what it deems to be 100%. So this is pretty close because the file is actually large. But if you want to fit it to the screen, just click on fit screen, it'll zoom out the window. Okay. All right. So the other thing that you can use in combination, or you will be using a combination with the zoom. So say you've zoomed into a portion of your photo and you're making some edits and all that stuff, good stuff, right? So sometimes you're not going to want to keep moving in and out. You want to sort of be able to navigate within a specific section. So you can actually activate the hand tool, and that will allow you to move around your photo or whatever project that you're working on. You can move it around when you're zoomed in. It won't work when you're zoomed out because you don't really need to when you're zoomed out fully. So if I activate my zoom tool again by pressing Z or clicking on the minus in the options bar and I zoom out, you'll notice that this pan, well, it still works here because I have it selected in my that option selected in my preferences, but you'll notice if you have not adjusted your preferences, you might not be able to move your canvas around. So I'm going to fit this back to my screen, and I'm going to activate the move tool again. All right, and so now we're going to get to actually playing around with the photo. So the first thing we want to do, or the main thing we want to do with this photo, is actually brighten the image. So we're going to actually do that by starting to incorporate some of those adjustments that we mentioned earlier from that image menu. So if we go to image and we go to adjustments and then brightness and contrast, that's going to bring up our brightness and contrast window. And what brightness and contrast essentially does is it shifts all the values. So values are like considered like black, gray, and white. Photos are basically made up of like those type of values, black, grays, and whites. So it shifts all of those values either to the right, it'll make it brighter, and to the left, it'll increase the shadows, so it'll make it darker. So if I were to shift up the brightness, it'll obviously increase all the values all at once. If I shift it to the left here, it'll decrease all the values, therefore boosting all the shadows, all the blacks, and sort of crushing everything and making it really, really dark. Okay, so that's a very simple way to adjust your exposure of your image, which is like the brightness of your image or the darkness of your image. So you can either use brightness and contrast. This photo honestly doesn't need any contrast, so we'll leave that alone. But another option you can actually use, and it's also underneath image and adjustments, you can go to levels. So I feel like levels actually gives you more control. And when you're looking at this window, it's broken up into sort of like that, what I mentioned earlier, like these are your blacks over here, this darker arrow here, these are your blacks. This middle arrow is representative of your grays. And this arrow on the far right over here is actually representative of your highlights. So if I wanted to have more control over my image, I could take the grays and shift those to the left, and it's going to boost those up. And you'll notice when I'm doing that, like you'll notice when I had when I was using brightness, it shifted all the values. But when I do that, the sky was sort of blown out, right? So if I don't want to blow out my highlights too much, and I just sort of want to like boost up this main sort of this girl right here and some of the trees a little bit, I can shift those values within my grays to brighten up the photo. Now, if you want the highlights to be brighter as well, you can just a smidgen, brighten that up, and then you have a brightened photo, okay? So if I press OK, I'm gonna zoom out a little bit so you can see it better. And so that's significantly better than what we had before. I'm gonna do a quick little before and after by pressing Control Z. So this is before, this is after. So now if you do not feel comfortable using the levels or anything like that yet, you can actually use auto adjustments within that levels adjustment. So if I go back to image and adjustments and then select levels again, and say I'm not very comfortable again using these level adjustments, I can click on auto and it'll do a pretty good job leveling it out for us. Okay. All right. Any questions so far about what we've covered in terms of interface or navigation tools or levels like brightening up your photo? Any questions so far? All right, so there doesn't seem to be any questions, so we're going to keep moving for the sake of time. All right, so we're actually going to open up another photo. And to do that, I'm going to put on my other screen here. I'm going to close out this tab. So remember to close out a document when you're done with it, you can just click on the X and it'll close it out. It might ask you to save. We're not going to save it, so don't save it if it asks you to save. But we're going to go to File and Open, or if you're on that landing page, you can do Open from there. And we're going to open up this photo of a man in a shirt. And we're going to do quite a bit with this photo. All right. So here we have our guy in a shirt, nice smile here. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to play around with some color adjustments some more. I know one of you had asked about reference photos, so that's not something that we're going to cover in this lesson, but one of the functions that we were going to do was use Camera Raw, which you can actually use a reference panel, like a before and after panel, by using Camera Raw. So, but with this photo, There's actually, depending on whether your monitor is color corrected or not, like it's color accurate or not, you'll notice there is a slight orange tint to this photo. And so we want to correct that. We want to make sure it looks like gray, like a true gray. Because I mean, it's sort of white, but it's also sort of gray, right? But we want to get rid of that sort of yellowy, orangey tint. And so in order to do that, first I'm going to unlock my layer just to give us some more freedom here. And then I'm going to go to filter up in the menu. And then I am going to click on camera raw filter. All right. And so if you are familiar with Lightroom at all, this camera raw window here, it should be very familiar to you. It's giving you basically all the tools you need to do some basic color correction to your photos. All right. So we won't get crazy here. If you are interested in learning how to do some in-depth color correction to photos or photography in particular, especially when you want to edit large amounts of photos at a single time, at the end of the lesson there will be an evaluation form. Please submit in the evaluation form whether you or not you will be interested in doing a Lightroom tutorial virtually or in person, and that will sort of cater more towards that sort of color grading, color correction for photography type of situation. But with this, we're just going to get rid of the color cast. So we're going to click on basics. And for this, it's really like a 1-2 click simple. We're going to select this eyedropper here. And when you're selecting the eyedropper, what we're doing here is selecting a point for the white balance to be sampled. So you either want to select, depending on the photo that you have, you either want to select the white in the photo, you want to select a black or a gray. So in this specific case, we want to select the white because we're trying to like get a correct color temperature for this. Now you can customize it, but again, we're doing auto because it's just for basic on the go color correction. So we're going to just click and sample that, and you'll see that it's significantly brighter. It's evened out. It's a lot more cooler in tone. Now, if you decide that it's still a little yellow or it's pushing a little too close to blue, you can make those adjustments yourself. And it really only takes like micro adjustments. You can push it to the right to add more yellow within your white balance here, or you can push it to the blue if you want it to be even more sort of cool toned. Okay, and I thought it looked pretty good the first time, so I'm gonna take my sample eyedropper here and click. Oh, actually, I think some more blue, some more cool tone might look nice. And we're gonna click OK to confirm. Okay, so we got rid of that color cast. Any questions? Oh, sorry. So the reference photo, let's bring that window back up. So I'm going to go to filter and camera raw. Oh, sorry. Filter, camera raw filter. Just going to bring up the window again. So if you are comparing a before and an after for a photo, so I would have to make a change here. But if I make a change here, like do some damage here, you know, if you want to see a before and after, you can actually toggle that on by clicking this button next to the square here. And that's going to show you before and after. Lightroom actually gives you an option to put another photo, like if you're referencing the color from another photo, it gives you an option to have it side by side. I don't see that option here. Oh, yeah, I don't see that option here for like multiple photos, but if you were to do it in Lightroom, it would have it. Unfortunately, it doesn't have it in here, it looks like. But again, if that's something you're interested in, please feel free to fill out an evaluation form and request a Lightroom class, okay? All right. Cancel all changes, yes. All right, so we've brightened up his appearance in this background quite a bit. The next thing that we're gonna do, sorry a second. So we're going to play around with some more color correction tools. And at this point, we're actually going to sort of teeter into that non-destructive editing style. So before we were using image and adjustments to make those color corrections or that brightness corrections for the previous photo. But in doing so, you'll notice that when you make those adjustments, you sort of just make the adjustment, right? Just say we go to levels and we make an adjustment, random one, and we click OK. So if I were to save this file and exit it at this point, if I wanted to make any changes, it wouldn't bring me back to that original file. So it would overwrite all the data from that original point, and it would it basically makes it inflexible for you to come back and make more adjustments. So let's say I save this. So I'm going to save this photo as it is. And then anytime you want to save this photo, save a photo, you're going to go to File, Export, Export As, and let's just do a JPEG. So the format is JPEG. I'm going to export this to my downloads. And then I'm going to open it back up. So opening up a separate file. And it's great. They're right next to each other. So say I undo the changes I made on this first image, just enough to get that color tone back to the way it was. So with this one, those changes have already been made. So if I wanted to decrease the brightness, not only am I unable to get sort of the same quality that I had before, depending on how high quality the image is, but you'll notice like when you zoom in, it actually distorts, like cause some distortion within the photo. Now this is something you wouldn't know unless you're like really paying attention, like you're really like a stickler when it comes to photo editing. But typically once you save an image and you've made some changes, it's always, and especially when you save it as a JPEG, it's always gonna delete information and make it harder to make those adjustments once you come back and try to edit it again. Now, again, if you're not particularly doing anything professionally, this is fine if you just open up an image and slap another adjustment on top to undo something, quote unquote, to undo it. But typically when you're using Photoshop, you want to practice a technique called non-destructive editing. So we're going to close this. So one of the methods of non-destructive editing is to use adjustment layers. So a layer is essentially think of it as like a clear sheet. And so you can stack those clear sheets on top of a base layer. So this base layer would be this photo of this guy. And so you can stack like those color adjustments over top of this photo and click on them and make edits to them after you save it as a PSD file, which is a Photoshop project file. So I'm going to show you what I mean. So I'm going to come to my window menu and bring up my adjustments panel. And I'm going to slide that right between my navigator and my history. So if you hover over these if you follow along with me and have activated your adjustments panel, you'll notice that these same icons, when you hover over them, those same ones are available in that image adjustment menu. Except for when you click on these. So say we click on brightness and contrast. You'll notice right beneath that adjustment window, what it has done is created a separate layer. So unlike when we activated the image adjustment, I'm going to select my image here in order for that change to be made. So unlike when we made an image adjustment here, when you click it and you confirm, nothing pops up in this layer menu. But with the layer adjustment, it just sits on top of the original photo. So in doing that, we can make changes, click out of it, and then double click it to come back and make more changes or undo things if you want to. So I can make changes, and if I want to reset or go back, I can just click this arrow here. Okay. Any questions so far about how the adjustment layer works? All right. So what we're going to do with this specific photo, I'm going to delete this layer actually. What we're going to do with this photo is actually change the color. But if we want to isolate the color of his shirt, for example, if we want to change the color of a shirt, we have to isolate it first. So we're going to use a new tool in combination with the adjustment layers. So if I come to the fourth tool down, if you hover over it, it might say Object Tool by default. But if you click and hold, a submenu will come out. And the tool that we're looking for, you can use Object Selection Tool, but the tool that we're looking for is Quick Selection. So we're going to select that tool. We're going to use that selection tool to sort of draw over his shirt here. And a selection, like I said, basically isolates a part of the image so that any changes that you make within that selection affects the image. So I'm going to increase my brush size here. So up in the options bar, you can actually click on this little circle here, and right where it says size, you can drag it up to increase the size of my brush. You can pull it out to see how big it is. Let's go with that for right now. It's about 220 something pixels or so. So with that selected, I'm going to start clicking around on the shirt. Just brushing over the shirt, trying to get as much as possible. It's fine if you are clicking and you don't necessarily get all of it. But just for example's sake, just gonna click around until we get most of it. So if you're using Scarby Zoom, you can just use the zoom tool. You don't necessarily have to activate. You can just press Z and just click and drag in. For me, because my Scarby Zoom isn't working, I'm going to click and hold on Z, and using, sorry. Using my scroll bar, I'm going to click in. And I'm going to come back to this quick selection tool now that I'm zoomed in. I'm going to keep selecting. I'm going to go back and forth between adjusting the size of my brush here. Sorry, correction. When I was zooming in, I'm actually holding down Alt for, I have a keyboard that works with both Mac and Windows. I'm actually holding down Alt and using my middle scroll wheel to zoom in some more incrementally. I'm going to keep adjusting the size here to add some more. And I mean, This could obviously use a lot more cleanup. You could spend all day making a clean selection, honestly, but this should be good for right now. I'm gonna zoom back out. All right, so I have a selection of our shirt here. So we're gonna use a new adjustment here. We're gonna actually use a Hue and Saturation Adjustment. We're gonna start off with that. So hovering over these different adjustments, you're gonna find Hue and Saturation, which is the first icon on the second row of the adjustment panel. So we're gonna click on that, and you'll see that it has created a mask, actually a cutout of that shirt automatically from that selection. And so with that mask made, it has masked out, based on what our selection was, it has masked out that area for the shirt. And so if I were to decide to want to change the blues of that shirt, for example, I can actually separate, like go through the different channels of this Hue and Saturation panel here and find the blues. And I'm just going based off of what it sort of looks like. It's sort of blue. It could be leaning towards cyan. I'm going to go find blues, and then I can shift the hue of it. So hue is just different colors in the color spectrum. So I'm going to start shifting that color. You'll notice it starts to change. Looks like our mask was not that clean. It's still a portion here, and that is fine. If you ever need to make adjustments to your mask after the fact, after your selection, you can actually use the brush tool. And a brush tool, traditionally you would use to like paint or something like that, but especially when you're working with photography and mask and composites, for example, you would use the brush tool to add or take away from your photo in companion with the mask. So in partnership with the mask. So I'm going to increase that brush size by going to the options bar up here. You can also right click within the window and increase that way. So again, if you want to adjust the brush size, you can use the options bar and then come up to size, or you can right click within the actual canvas. And then you can just start painting. Clean it up a little bit. So it's obviously not selecting some of this because it's leaning towards more cyan than it is blue, which is fine. We can just click on that Hue and Saturation adjustment within the layers panel. And then we can go to cyan and shift that color. Or colorize it. Okay. So, any questions so far about the hue and saturation or making a selection? All right, now say you wanted to change the color of a shirt. So right now it's only shifting the colors of the shirt based on the colors that are already existing within the shirt. So blue, for example. So we can actually change the color of the shirt itself by creating another adjustment layer. So I'm going to actually delete this top layer here, this hue and saturation layer, by clicking on this trash can icon. And that's fine. We're going to go and say yes on that. And I'm going to look for a color fill. So I don't see the color fill within the adjustments. So if you click on this like little halftone circle in the layers panel, it'll bring up some of those same color adjustments. So we're looking for a solid color. So I'm going to click on solid color, and this will bring up what is called a color picker window. And so from this window, you're able to choose a different color that you want. The way that you navigate it is you would first select a hue that you are looking for. So what color are you looking for? And so say you wanted to make this shirt red. So we would choose that, maybe a deeper red. And then we would adjust the value. So remember, values is more so going between like the blacks, the whites, and the grays, which you'll see right here. So value, and then your saturation. Value up and down, saturation. Okay, so I'm going to select that. And because I want to be able to see my image beneath this color fill layer, I'm going to deactivate this layer real quick. And to do that, I'm going to just click on this eyeball. And so by clicking on this eyeball, I actually hide the layer. It's still there, but I'm just hiding it so I can see what's beneath it. So remember, as I said before, layers sort of act as like clear sheets of paper. So you're able to see beneath it, whether you adjust the transparency or whether you toggle on or off the visibility of a layer. Okay, so I am going to make that selection again using the quick selection tool. I'm going to adjust the brush size. And while I'm doing this, feel free to ask any questions about what we've covered so far, whether it's about color adjustments or layers or selection, this quick selection tool that I'm using right here, the brushes. If you have any questions about adjusting the brush size, if you're struggling with that, the zoom, anything like that, just go ahead and leave a comment in the YouTube live chat and I will try to answer it as best as I can. Yeah, I'll zoom in a little bit. And if you are newly tuning in, keep in mind that anything that we've missed so far, you can, even though this is a live stream, you can actually rewind and see what we already covered during the live stream. So you can rewind and then also fast forward to the current real time viewing if you would like. And I'm going to clean this up a little bit. All right, so we have our selection. And what I'm going to do now is activate this red layer again. Okay. And what I'm going to do is actually create a clipping mask. So I'm going to basically only make it so that this layer, this colored layer, this red layer here, only applies to the selection or the photo below. So I'm going to do, in order to do that, I'm going to hover between these two layers here. And by holding down the Alt or Command key, if you're on a Mac, I'm going to press down and it's going to create a little arrow that makes it let you know that that layer is now sitting over top, directly over top, and only affecting that layer that's beneath it, the main layer. All right. So if you remembered a mask with a mask, you can take and add, you can add and take away with a brush tool. So I'm going to increase my brush size. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And making sure that mask icon is selected, I'm going to activate my brush tool again. And then I want to make sure, in order to take away from the mask, you need to use black. So black takes away from the mask and white adds to it. So I'm going to switch my color pickers here. If I click on this little arrow here, it's going to switch these and make it so that black is my foreground color. So if I click this, this is the color picker, and that's like a little small icon for it. So with this, I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger so I just cover more room. And so you'll notice with the selection on the inside, it's covering the inside right now. We get the shirt that's visible. I'm going to click undo. And if I activate my marquee tool or my selection tool and right click these little marching ants here, they're called marching ants. I right click my selection and then click on select inverse. That way, when I click on my mask in between my brush, I can erase so that only the red shows up in the circle. So I'm just going to erase away. Now there is a much faster way to do this, but we don't cover it until lesson 1 or Photoshop 1. Trying to keep it kind of simple starting out. All right, so you may be thinking this looks bad, and you are correct. But basically we have our selection for our color fill. Now, in order to, actually use some cleanup, but in order to make this blend in with the layer beneath it, we're going to have to use something called blending layers. We won't get too much into it, but just to demonstrate how like you would change the color of an object by selecting a custom color fill first or something like that, you could actually change the blending layer by selecting this little drop down menu up here where it starts off saying normal, and we're only going to go over one. But if you select either darken or multiply, but you probably want to do multiply for it to look most natural. If you click on multiply, it will blend it in with the layer beneath it. So you still see the stripes, you still see the buttons and all that. But now it's red. And like I said, it could obviously use a little bit more cleanup. When you have time to yourself, you definitely want to take time to go in with that brush or like go in with your quick selection tool and clean up those different areas. Okay. All right. Now, any questions so far up until this point? Okay. So I'm going to zoom out again. All right, so we're going to move on. I'm going to actually delete this color fill. And we're going to move on to another non-destructive editing technique, which will be underneath the crop tool. So if you look down on the 5th tool on your toolbar, you can click and activate the crop tool. And so the crop tool, in my opinion, is pretty straightforward. You can adjust the ratio based on what you need it specifically for. So say if you were uploading online, social media like Instagram specifically, and you need like a 1-to-1 ratio or a square, you can come to the ratio, select 1 by 1, and then reposition your photo. Maybe have them in the center, and you can confirm by clicking this check mark, or you can press enter on your keyboard if you're using a PC, or return on a Mac if you're using a Mac, and it will crop the photo. Now you'll notice if I drag this out, all that information is gone. And in the options bar, we have something checked called delete cropped pixels. Now, because it has deleted our cropped pixels, this is considered a destructive way of editing because we cannot recover that information that we have deleted. So I'm going to click undo, or I'm going to undo by clicking Control Z. And return. Okay. And now when I'm under, I'm going to deselect delete cropped pixels. And I'm going to go for that again. I'm going to reposition them. And then this time, when we confirm the crop on this one, you'll notice that when we select or click the photo again, you still see that information outside in this darkened gray area. So that information is still there. So if you ever want to add more to the photo or bring more back into the photo, you can bring that information back. Right now, I still have that ratio on there, so I'm going to go back to my ratio and make it original ratio. So when I'm adjusting here, oops, I'm going to clear. And then once I'm adjusting here, it's just going to let me have a freeform. Okay. So all that information still exists there when you uncheck delete crop pixels, and that is considered a form of non-destructive editing. Now, if you would like, I'm going to undo here. If you would like to, say, generate new information, say if you want to extend the right side of this photo, because you can see he's a little off center, and maybe if you want him right directly in the center, but you need some more information on that right hand side, you can actually use a feature called Content Aware. And Photoshop will basically use its super smart brain, computer brain, to generate information on the right side of that photo based on the surrounding pixels. And it generally works best with a photo that doesn't necessarily have too much like differences in color and stuff like that. It's like a simple photo like this. There's not too much going around in the background, so it's easy to recreate. So if I select Content Aware, and then I activate my crop by clicking on it, clicking on the photo. I'm going to zoom out a little bit first, actually. Okay. So I have Content Aware activated. Now, if I drag out here, right now I just see this sort of checker background here. Anytime you see this checkered background, it basically means transparency. So there's nothing that exists beyond that specific layer. Like if I extended this out and didn't have Content Aware on, it would just show this transparent layer. But with Content Aware checked, I'm going to center them off a little bit more. And then if I press the check mark here, or press enter or return for Mac, it's going to think a little bit, and then it's going to extend my photo out. Okay. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where you need to get a little bit more space or generate some more pixels for an image, you can use Content Aware to fill in the gaps essentially for your desired look. Okay. All right, so the next thing we're going to do, actually, we're going to adjust the ratio on this to be for video. So if we were doing video, say we were making a thumbnail, the ratio that you want is 16:9. And so this is saying 16:9. So I'm going to go ahead and confirm on this. Well, actually, I want him a little bit to the left for this, the right for this. So we're kind of almost starting off where we initially were. I'm going to move him to the left. And remember, we have Content Aware on, so it's going to generate those pixels that we're missing over this side right here. And make it a little bit bigger. and then we're going to check it off. And we have some extra pixels being being generated. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do with this specific photo, we're just going to do something. We're going to use a really quick and cool and fun and nice, lovely feature in Photoshop, which is remove background. So this is probably what a lot of people want to know, how to remove a background automatically. So if you have a layer that is unlocked, if you come over to your properties panel, you can actually select the subject if you want to create your own selection and sort of determine what you want in the selection. Usually select subject is going to select what it deems to be the focus of that image. So obviously in this particular situation, Photoshop is saying this person is the focal point of this image. So you can do select subject to make the selection first, and you might need to add some to it, but generally Photoshop does a pretty good job at making that selection. There is a slight little, mishap here. I'm going to click on fit to screen. Or if you don't want to select subject and you don't want to customize your selection, you can simply click on remove background and it will get rid of the background for you. And it doesn't look like it chipped it off to me, but who can tell? All right, so we have our background removed here. And so at this point, we're going to start incorporating some more tools and some of the other different selection options you have to choose from. So what we're going to do actually is create a layer. So remember we talked about how layers, again, you can see beneath them. If you have like a mask, for example, or it's not fully covering up the entire canvas, you can typically consider like layers something that you see beneath the next one in order to generate some sort of like composition, the overall composition, right? So we're gonna click on this and we wanna make a background. So we can't do a color fill, but we're gonna save that for tomorrow's class. What we're gonna do with this one actually is create this layer and drag it beneath the guy so our background sits beneath him. So like I said, there's like a hierarchy here and our background should sit beneath the guy. Okay, so we want to fill in this background with some color. So say I want to make a crest add. I want some color. I want two different colors for this background, but both blue, because crest's colors are like what? Red, blue, and white, right? So I'm going to create a selection over this first bottom half, and I can either take my brush tool or my shape tool. The shape tool makes more sense because we're drawing a rectangle. But if you are going to use your shape tool, you need to set it to pixels. Otherwise, it's going to create a separate layer, and we're not getting into that today. Like we're not getting in that much depth for that today. We're going to select pixels, and then we come over to our color picker, and we're going to set some blue here. We're going to find a little bit of a deep blue, sort of a crest blue. Let's go with that. So with our color selected, we're going to click and drag, and it's going to fill in that selection with the color. Okay. Oh boy. All right, Photoshop has frozen. I will be right back. In the meantime, if you have any questions, like I said before, go ahead and feel free to add your questions to the YouTube chat. All right, so this is good that it crashed because you'll notice that depending on what computer you're using, if you don't have enough RAM or you don't have enough coming from the graphic processor enough for Photoshop to run, Photoshop probably will crash, especially if you're like live streaming or something like that. A lot of horsepower is being used by the computer. So you might come across a time where your files are going to, you know, close up when it freezes. But luckily, Photoshop is pretty good at recovering the last state that you were in. So the last thing we sort of drew here was a rectangle. Luckily, we didn't get that far, but Photoshop usually does a pretty good job at recovering your files when you're using them. So we're just going to keep using this particular recovered file, and you'll know it's recovered by the document tab up here. It says recovered. All right, so I'm just gonna redo those actions that I made. I'm gonna draw my selection here. Oh boy. All right, I have decided to go ahead and open up the toothpaste add PSD, which is actually in the Dropbox folder that I have linked down below. So if you would like to go ahead and just to make it a little less effort on the computer here, if you'd like to go ahead and open up that PSD, you can. And in that PSD, you'll see like a list of different adjustments and layers and text that I've added to create a toothpaste ad. A very simple one. But what I was essentially trying to do was create a background with two separate colors here. Okay, and the way that I did that was I took the selection tool, and for the top layer I actually used the brush to fill it in. So if I'm gonna risk it again, I actually took this selection, used the brush, and increased the size, chose a color from the color picker, and I brushed it until I filled it in. Okay, so like I said before, you can either choose to use the brush, or you can use the shape tool when it is selected on pixels specifically, not shape. Shape will create a layer, which is actually good, but we won't get into that right now. So we have our background here. Once you're done filling in those rectangles, The next thing we're going to do is sort of create a spotlight to basically create some separation, like have him pop a little bit back off of the background a little bit. So I'm going to take my brush tool and I'm going to make it really big. But first I'm going to create a new layer. And this separate layer will be our brush. So if I double click on the layer 2 here, I can rename it. I'm going to rename it Spotlight. All right, so with my brush tool, I'm going to make it really big. Again, you can either choose to adjust your brush size via the options bar, or you can right click into the canvas and increase the size that way. I want it, again, really big. So I'm probably looking for maybe 2,000, 3,000. Yeah. Okay, so I have my brush size. So one thing we did not cover is how to adjust the hardness or softness of your brush. Currently, my brush is set to 0 hardness. So that means it's going to create a really soft like gradient. Like it's going to create a really soft pressure when I draw, right? It's going to be really faded at the edges. If I were to drag this hardness up, it's just going to be like a full circle, like a sharp edge full circle. But if we were trying to create a soft, gradual gradient of a sort of like spread out light, we definitely want to have the hardness closer to 0, if not 0. So with that set, we're going to choose a color. So you could either use white. White tends to be a little bit too stark, but I like to use a light, very, very light blue. So I'm going to shift my color to light blue. And then I'm going to shift my value towards like a lighter blue. And I'm going to pop that right in the center, pop that spotlight right in the center. So it's just going to give it a little bit of a little pizzazz, you know? All right. So we have our spotlight. Let me look through here. And so the next thing you're going to do is drop in our product. So you're actually able to drag and drop other photos into a separate canvas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, Open, and in that Photoshop Basics folder is a crest PNG. And it's going to open up in a separate document. But what I can do is actually click and drag from either the layer or click and drag the image itself. But just to be safe, I'm going to select the specific layer and then drop it into, hold, keep holding it, hover over the tab, the document tab that you want to drop it in, keep holding, and then you're going to release in that window. Now this is significantly smaller than what we actually want it to be. So the first thing we're going to do actually is we got to scale it up. So in order to scale up an item or an object, I should say, you could do it one of two ways. You could go to Edit and activate the Free Transform tool. And so when the Free Transform tool is activated, it sort of looks like these, it's like a box with 9 squares around the corners and edges. So we're going to hover over those edges, and when those double arrows show up, you can click and expand the photo to make it a lot bigger. So we're going to, this should be good, about this size. So and then press return or enter to confirm the size. We're going to pop it right next to them, okay? All right. So we're going to name this. Remember to rename a layer. You just double click on the name. And spell it right. And now with that layer selected, we're going to try to remove that background because it's not a true PNG. We need to get rid of that white space. So we're going to expand this panel here and go to our properties panel. And then we're going to click remove background. So just like it did with the guy, it'll remove the background here. All right, so it's off to a pretty good start. All right, and so it's looking a little flat, especially with the crest laying over to these two colors, still looking pretty flat. So we're gonna add a little bit more dimension via a layer style. And so to add a layer style, we won't get too deep into them, but we're just gonna add a drop shadow. So in order to add a drop shadow layer style, we just need to double click this toothpaste layer. You don't want to click the icons because they will bring up separate functions. Well, actually you can't click the icons. You can double click the icons. And then you're going to look for a drop shadow. And then click on drop shadow. And then you can actually select the color of your drop shadow. Typically for me, I like to keep my drop shadow either black or within the same sort of color family as whatever the actual item is to create a more natural look. So like whether it's like a dark blue, just sort of deepen it to a dark blue. And then you can increase the distance. So that when you increase the distance, you'll start to see it some more. It's looking kind of sharp. So we want to increase the spread a little bit. Have it on 18, and then more importantly, this is going to soften it up. Increase the size. So increasing that size will definitely soften it up and have it pop up against that background there. Okay, you can also adjust the transparency or the opacity of that drop shadow. I think about 40 looks pretty good. So all these settings look okay. You can adjust the angle if you want. The angle will basically just change the direction the shadow is falling. So I'm gonna have mine falling a little bit down towards the right. And then when you're done, obviously you just click OK to confirm. All right. Any questions so far about how to add a layer style? Anything like that? Anything we covered within the specific document? Okay. So moving on, the next thing we'll do is add text. So, hey, what did I even say? So in order to activate the text tool, you're just going to click on this T in the toolbar. And like I said, again, the options that show up for the text tool are going to be different from the other ones when you activate a different tool. But once the text tool is activated, you have one or two ways about going with this. If you're just trying to type out a very short line, like a 2-word, 3-word type situation, or it's going straight across, you can just click and just type in that one line, and it's going to go all the way across. Okay, and this is really small. So, but yeah, let me zoom in a little bit. So it's going to go all the way across here, and then undo. The other option you have is to make a text box, and by default, it'll fill it in with the lorem ipsum sort of default standard generic text. It'll fill in all that excess area. And you could resize it and the text will conform to that specific box. So create a text box if you are trying to keep text confined within a certain area, and if you are just trying to make like a bold sort of title headline situation, you're just going to click and type within that same line. You're going to type within that same space. So we're just going to click, and then the first thing we're going to type is, what did it say? It said stronger teeth is the first line. So I'm going to click just to activate it. I'm going to type stronger teeth. And so obviously we want this font to be a lot bigger. Okay. So to make the font bigger, you're actually going to, in the options bar, you're going to come over to these two little T's, this little T and this big T. And you can change it one of two ways. You can use the drop down menu here, and it's actually going to cap off at 72, which is fine for this one. But you'll find when you're working with images that are a lot bigger in size, you're going to want to use the slider to adjust the scale or input certain numbers. So say if I know specifically that I want to use like 150, I could type that in and have it be 150, or I can use the slider and sort of gradually create the specific size that I need. Okay. Now, if you want to move your text, again, just use the move tool. And you can activate that by pressing V or just clicking on it up here at the top. So we repositioned our text here. And so the next thing we're going to do is probably change the font. So I'm activating my text tool again, and I could either click and highlight it if I wanted to highlight specific text. So if I just wanted to change the font for part of the text, I can highlight just that specific section of it. So stronger, I can make that bold if I wanted to. So say I come down to my font types here, my different font types. And let's say I choose, you can scroll through. Trying to think of a font. I have a million fonts here. So Babus, let's say I do Babus or Bebus. So I could isolate it, specific text, to only affect certain sections of my line here. Now, if I want it all, then obviously I'll select all of it and then change my font accordingly. Okay. But to keep it simple, we're just going to change it to Arial. Because everybody should have Arial on their computer. It's a standard font. We'll do Arial bold, maybe? No, Arial narrow. And you can actually type it in if you know what it is, know what it's called. You just click into the box and just type it in. So Arial narrow. Reposition this again because the text has changed. And so one thing I want you to notice is when I'm moving this around, these pink lines are showing up. So what these pink lines are guidelines, and it's sort of helping you try to figure out different alignments that you can align your text or your objects to, so it can be directly in alignment with that object or other text that is on the canvas. So when I move this over, it's saying like this little pink line in the middle right here means that the text is directly in alignment with the crest box here. Okay, so that's good. All right, so that's looking pretty good. I'm just going to duplicate this text and move it down. So to duplicate, you can do it one of two ways. You can right click and choose duplicate layer, or my preferred way, you can click and drag it down to new layer, and that will duplicate your text, and it's going to sit right on top of the existing text. So I'm going to click and drag this down, and if I hold shift, it'll make sure that it's going down in a perpendicular way. Okay. All right. And so you'll notice I am on my move tool right now. But if you look to your right here over in the properties panel, if you have a text layer selected or any sort of layer, the properties panel will change depending on what layer you have selected. So if I want to change the font from here, I can. I don't necessarily have to reactivate the text tool in order to make more adjustments, like some simple adjustments. So I can go into, well, I'm good with Arial, so I'm just going to change the font style. So I'm going to come down to, let's do black. Or maybe, yeah, we can do black. So we're going to choose Arial Black, and obviously it's a little bit big. So we're going to decrease the size. Again, you can change the size by inputting the number or hovering over the little t and the small t, little t and the big T, and adjusting it that way. And then we're going to type in healthier Okay, we have stronger teeth, healthier gums. Now, it's a little difficult to see this like bright text on top of this like spotlight on top of a lot lighter background up here. So if you wanted to, you can do what we did earlier and add a drop shadow to your text actually. So all layers, you're able to apply different layer styles to. So if you wanted to add a drop shadow, you can. This is obviously a little bit strong, so you would need to adjust your settings accordingly and so on and so forth. Okay. And I can actually copy this layer style and paste it to the one beneath. All right. So there we have our little crest ad. Very minimal, basic little crest ad here. Okay, any questions so far about text or the layer style or even removing the background? We went over that a couple of times. All right, if there are no questions, we're going to get ready to wrap this up. But really quickly, I want to address that question from Cosmic Black Girl. Earlier, she asked about the reference photos. Like if you have two photos that you want to reference, I guess there is a way to do it. I totally forgot. I was thinking photography, Lightroom, this is where you should do it in. But if you have two different photos and you want to make a reference, let's say I'm going to open up two of the same image. So I'm going to open up this one underexposed here, and I'm gonna make some adjustments to this one, or no, yeah, let's say just to have something to compare it to, pretend this is a separate photo. I'm just making some changes, some random changes, pay no mind to me. Okay, all right, so I'm gonna save this image, export as to a PNG or a JPEG, since that's what's up there. All right, so I'm going to revert this back to the original. So if you ever want to revert an image back to the base, like its original, just go to File and Revert. Okay, so I'm going to open up that image from before that I just edited. All right. So the way you would sort of do these reference windows is you would actually adjust how your windows show up within your workspace. So if you come to Window and then Arrange, you have the ability to tile your document tabs in a way where you can look at multiple at the same time. So I'm going to collapse this property panel here. And if I wanted to look at two different photos, let's say side by side horizontally, I can choose something like 2 up vertical, and it's going to create 2 separate windows. And this is how you could like sort of use it as a reference if you wanted to have a separate image. Even if I had like my toothpaste ad open, for example, I have one image on the other side and another on here. If you wanted to reference color, something else, text, something, style, anything like that, you can have 2 separate windows open and visible at the same time by using Windows, Arrange, and then just choose the way that you want it to be set up. Okay. All right. All right. So last call for questions. If there aren't any, I'm gonna start to close up here. All right, so the one thing that we sort of like quickly went over this stuff, but how to save your files. I probably should have covered this earlier on in the lesson, but we went through it a little bit in terms of saving like a JPEG or a PNG. If you want to save a file as a final product, you're going to go to File, Export, and then Export As. And then at this specific window, you would choose the format. So if you want to save in a JPEG, you could choose your format underneath JPEG, and then you would fix the quality if you want it to be higher or lower quality. A higher quality photo would mean a larger file size. So this is like 3.9 megabytes at a higher file resolution. This is the resolution right here. And if I were to decrease that, it would obviously go down to 493 KB. Okay. And then if you want to do PNG is what I use. PNG for everything just because it seems to retain a little bit more quality than a JPEG. But if you want to do PNG and you have something in your file where you're trying to maintain the transparency, like you're trying to see behind the photo, you would use a PNG. But you would click on PNG or JPEG, click export, and then type your file name. Save it, choose a destination where you want to save it, whether it's your desktop or your downloads, and then you would click save. And then click cancel because I don't need to save it. If you want to save your project file, so this is what I talked about earlier in terms of saving a project file, so you're able to come back and work on it and make any changes. You would do that via a PSD file, a Photoshop project file. So in order to save a project file, you would go to File, Save As, and it's going to ask you if you want to save to Creative Cloud or save on your computer. I'm going to save on my computer here, and then it's already saved there, so I would just type in the file name that I wanted to save it as, and then click Save. And that's how you save a PSD. And typically, let me make this bigger. Typically, it would look like this when you save it. It's going to be a Photoshop icon, which is PS, and it looks blue. Okay. Well, if there aren't any more questions, I'm going to go over a few resources that you guys could visit to look for more in-depth tutorials online using our library resources. As long as you have a library card, you can use that to access sites such as LinkedIn Learning. So let me quickly go to my browser here. right, so on the library website, if you go to the Research and Learn tab and then click on online training, you'll find the section where it says LinkedIn Learning. I actually have the link for that also down in the description box below. But if you click on LinkedIn Learning and then type in your library card number, which me real quick, not have that up there. All right, and then from there, when you're logged in, you can go to browse and then click on creative, and it will actually give you a monster list of different tutorials and classes and workshops you can take depending on the category that you want to, or the subject that you want to take a look at. So if you're interested in graphic design, or if you're interested in video editing or animation or drawing, all that stuff like that, you can use your library card to log into LinkedIn Learning and access the extensive amount of different tutorials that they have on this website. It is pretty awesome. I've used it. It's pretty great. I'm gonna click on photography. And these are like classes that are like 18 hours. It can be 18 hours, 2 hours, 24 hours. I haven't made it through a full 24-hour one, but they're really good. So definitely check out this resource. If you're interested in finding more photos to practice with, I've also included a link to that in the description box below. Some of my favorite sites are called Pexels. So this is a free stock photo site, and you can come here and find photos that you want to edit, or if you want to use them like to manipulate for composites, which we'll sort of work with in the next class. Tomorrow we'll be working with Photoshop 1, which will sort of get into how to composite and a little bit more graphic design and do a little bit more with retouching photos. But this is a great place to start for like sample stock photos to work with. Another site that you can use, especially if you have Adobe, is Adobe Stock. So let's see. So particularly with this, Adobe Stock is not free flat out. You actually have to filter your search results to go to free. And then when you go to free, selecting that tab, then you can search for what you want, and everything that's underneath that specific free tab will be free to license. So if I typed in, I don't know, umbrella because it's raining, all of these are free to license. You'll see it's free, and you would license it. Click on it, and you can actually open it in the app directly if you wanted to. Okay. Now, if you were looking to practice a little bit more with color correction, one of my favorite sites is Signature Edits. And so here you can get raw files, and raw files are basically files that you have a little bit more leeway with in terms of color correction and color grading. But yeah, if you needed like photography, like unedited photos to work with, usually Pexels, the photos are already edited, but these photos have not been touched. So they're a really great option to practice your photo editing with. Yeah. All right. And let's see. All right, so for those of you who are still watching, or if you're watching at a later date, plan on watching it later, please feel free to visit our library at Main Street Library to utilize the Digital Media Lab's Adobe Suite. We have camera equipment and all the other different types of stuff here. So feel free to call. And if you have any more questions about class or anything like that, you can keep up to date by visiting our library website and going to the events page to see what's going on. Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys for watching. Please remember to fill out that technology class and workshop evaluation form. I've linked that down in the description box below. So go ahead and fill that out if you would be so kind enough to. And thank you for watching. If there's no more questions, I'll hang out a little bit more. If you have any questions, I'll hang out a little bit more and for about 10 minutes. And if I spot any, I'll sort of go over that briefly if I have some time. Okay. All right. Well, thank you.